They slapped me with a $3,000 penalty for my rescue dog's barking, then moved to take my house when I couldn't cover it. What they didn't anticipate was that I'd just inherited my grandfather's mineral rights windfall, valued at $2,300,000. Thunk. That's the noise those foreclosure documents made when they landed on my granite countertop at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. The same counter where I'd been feeding Cooper his breakfast every day for 8 months, watching him steadily push past the anxiety that made him bark to begin with. But here's the truth about bullies in authority. They always misjudge the quiet ones. And wow, did Caroline Mercer miscalculate with me. Because before I explain how I turned their entire subdivision into a haven for dogs, where that same HOA president now bags waste for 47 rescues as court-ordered service, drop a comment. What would you do if some power-drunk HOA board tried to take your home over your pet? And while you're crafting that revenge daydream, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know if this HOA horror is everywhere or just here in Texas. My name is Lena. I'm 34 and 8 months ago, I believed I'd found my slice of suburban calm in Pine Valley Estates. Fresh divorce, new role as a software engineer, and this beautiful golden retriever named Cooper, whom I adopted from the local shelter. The poor guy had separation issues so severe, he'd tremble when I picked up my keys. Pine Valley looked flawless on paper. 47 copy-and-paste McMansions built in 2019. Each one worth about $400. Wrapped in an HOA promising premium lifestyle upkeep for just $300 a month. The smell of fresh mulch and chemical lawn treatments hit you the second you drove through those ornate stone gates. Every morning at 6 a.m. on the dot, you'd hear the synchronized hiss of identical sprinklers firing like a metronome. That's where I met Caroline Mercer. 52, HOA board president for 3 straight years, and living in the largest corner lot house like a suburban monarch. She'd retired early from her bank manager job and spent her days measuring grass length with an actual ruler. I'm not kidding. And parading her 2 overgroomed poodles named Pearl and Sterling. These dogs were so perfectly trained they probably asked permission to inhale. The first time Caroline knocked on my door, Cooper had been barking for maybe 20 minutes while I dashed to the grocery store. Nothing wild, just typical anxious dog behavior. But there she stood at 7 p.m. sharp, clipboard poised, wearing enough gardenia perfume mixed with hairspray to floor a horse. Some of us work hard to maintain property values here, she said, handing me a noise violation warning and complete with time-stamped photos she'd apparently taken from her window. The condescension slid off every syllable, like that sticky sweet perfume. I tried to explain Cooper's anxiety, how we were working with a trainer, how he was improving by the week. Caroline just smiled, thin-lipped, and tapped her pen against that clipboard. Rules are rules, dear. We all make sacrifices for the greater good. Week 1, written warning. Week 2, Cooper barks during a thunderstorm. Second violation. Week 3, $500 fine for repeat offense. I learned later Caroline had been logging everything with a sound meter app, like she was building a legal case against a 3-year-old rescue. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood walked on eggshells. Hank, the retired firefighter next door, would give me apologetic looks over the fence. He'd whisper about how Caroline once fined him $200 for hanging his American flag too low. Paula, the single mom across the street, had been stashing her garden gnomes in the garage since Caroline declared them unapproved decor. There was even a secret text thread called Pine Valley Resistance, where neighbors warned each other when Caroline was making her rounds with that cursed clipboard. But here's what I didn't know yet, and what Caroline absolutely didn't realize was that my grandfather had passed away 3 months earlier. Grandpa Joe was an old-school oil wildcatter who'd struck it big in West Texas back in the day. The attorneys were still processing his estate, but he'd left me something that would flip the script. Mineral rights worth $2 million, $300,000, zero. All those nights at 2 a.m., drinking harsh coffee and combing through HOA bylaws online, trying to figure out how to push back against Caroline's power trip, I had no clue I was sitting on a fortune that could buy and sell her entire subdivision. Cooper sensed my stress. His anxiety improved with the extra attention, but he'd still whimper when he heard Caroline's heels clicking down the sidewalk. Those stilettos announced her presence like a warning bell, and half the dogs on the block would start barking before she even came into view. Looking back, I think that's when I realized this wasn't just about one fussy HOA president with too much time. This was about people who use tiny slices of power to make others' lives miserable. And sometimes the universe hands you exactly the tools to push back. That wasn't done with me. Not even close. 2 weeks after that $500 fine, I'm out walking Cooper when I notice something new aimed straight at my backyard. Industrial-grade sound monitoring gear bolted onto Caroline's fence, like she's running a surveillance site. This wasn't a phone app anymore. This looked like equipment meant for a construction zone. But that was only the start. The very next morning, a city code enforcement officer shows up at my door, clipboard in hand, scanning my yard like he expects to uncover a full-blown kennel. "Ma'am, we got a complaint about a commercial breeding operation here." I nearly spit my coffee. Commercial breeding? I own one dog. He shrugged, just following up on the report. "Mind if I take a look?" While he's checking my perfectly normal backyard, one dog, one water dish, one tennis ball, I'm getting alerts on my phone. Caroline has been active on the neighborhood Facebook page, ranting about declining property values and residents who don't respect community standards. The comment section looks like a battlefield, her backers sniping about certain people who don't belong in a nice area like this. The bitter taste of those 2 a.m. coffees came flooding back. Hours I'd spent tearing through HOA bylaws online, desperate for a way to push back. Caroline assumed I'd fold and pay up. She never expected my software engineer brain to kick into problem-solving overdrive. My first discovery, she was overstepping her authority. The HOA rules clearly stated that fines over $100 required a board vote, not just the president's say-so. Every violation she'd slapped me with, she'd done solo, without authorization. So I did what any rational person would do. I put up my own security cameras, totally legal, pointed only at my property but conveniently catching wide views of the common areas Caroline patrolled. And that's when I uncovered my first mini twist. Remember her prim poodles, Pearl and Sterling? Turns out they're only angels when Caroline is there to micromanage them. Every Thursday at 2 o'clock sharp, she heads off to her bridge club across town. The second her car disappears, those picture-perfect dogs transform into furry alarm systems. 47 minutes of non-stop barking. I timed it. My phone's recorder captured every yap, every howl, while I sat on the porch with Cooper, who gave me a look like, "So are you seriously going to let them get away with this?" That satisfying click of the recording app starting up? Music to my ears. Meanwhile, Hank leaned over the fence one afternoon with fresh intel. "She got me with a $200 fine last year," he whispered, glancing around like Caroline might spring from the shadows. "Said my American flag was hanging 2 inches too low. Measured it herself." Then Paula joined us, speaking in low tones. "I've been hiding my garden gnomes in the garage for 6 months. She says they break architectural harmony standards." That's when Hank showed me something golden. The Pine Valley Resistance text chain. 23 neighbors trading Caroline horror stories and warning each other when she's doing her rounds. Mrs. Wu at the end of the street had been fined for rose bushes being the wrong shade of pink. Paula muttered, "Apparently they clash with the approved palette." Looking at these good folks sneaking around in their own neighborhood like they were living under some dictatorship, something clicked. This wasn't just about Cooper's barking anymore. This was about a bully terrorizing an entire community, one bogus fine at a time. That's when I made my first calculated move. I began logging everything. Every encounter, every notice, every suspicious activity, all entered into a spreadsheet with timestamps and photographic evidence. My software skills came in handy. I built a database thorough enough to make a forensic accountant cry with joy. And then came Caroline's first real vulnerability. While combing through county property records, just in case this escalated further, I found something damning. Caroline had been filing complaints about neighbors, too. Lots of neighbors. Mostly single women, a few elderly residents, one family with teens who played basketball in their driveway. A pattern emerged, but the real kicker? Cross-referencing her complaints with actual bylaws, half of them were fabricated. Garden gnomes? Not mentioned anywhere. Flag height rules? Nowhere to be found. Rosebush colors? Completely made up. Here's your first knowledge nugget. HOA board members can be held personally liable if they overstep. Always demand they cite the exact bylaw in writing. Most bullies crumble when you force them to back their claims. Cooper was thriving by then. His confidence grew daily, tail thumping like a drum when we passed Caroline's house. He could feel my energy shift from cornered victim to strategist. And truthfully, I was starting to enjoy this chess match. Caroline came back swinging. The next violation letter wasn't for $500. It was for $1,500, accusing me of continued offenses, even though Cooper hadn't barked once in over 2 weeks. And this one came with a nasty little threat: pay in 30 days or face foreclosure. Foreclosure over a dog who wasn't even barking anymore. But Caroline wasn't finished flexing. 2 days later, I get a glossy envelope from Mercer Associates. Turns out her husband, Raymond, is a lawyer. The cease and desist letter inside was a masterpiece of intimidation, ordering me to remove my security cameras for violating community privacy expectations. The irony hit like a punch. The woman who'd mounted sound monitors at my fence was lecturing me about privacy. That's when I decided to start digging deeper. You'd be shocked at what public records can reveal if you know where to look. First stop, the courthouse basement, which smelled like musty paper and stale despair. 3 hours of flipping through files and I struck gold. Raymond Mercer wasn't just Caroline's husband. He also sat on the City Planning Commission, the same body that signed off on HOA enforcement and code complaints. A neat little conflict of interest. And Caroline's complaint history as HOA president? Eye-opening. In just 3 years, she'd filed 247 complaints against residents. Compare that to her predecessor, who issued maybe 30 total. Caroline was relentless. That's when I made a move most homeowners never think of. I demanded a full financial audit of the HOA. By law, they had 30 days to deliver. When those records finally landed in my hands, it felt like uncovering the Rosetta Stone of corruption: $47,000 in unaccounted administrative fees. That's a mountain of missing money for a neighborhood with only 47 houses. The landscaping contract was a glaring red flag: $8,000 a month for basic lawn care, with no competitive bidding. A quick search later, I learned that Mercer Landscaping was owned by Caroline's brother-in-law. My software background made all the difference. I built a database to trace every expense, every payment, every vendor contract. The trail lit up like a neon sign: kickbacks, padded invoices, sweetheart family deals. Caroline had been treating the HOA like her personal ATM. But then she made a move so absurd it almost made me laugh. She called animal control on Cooper, claiming he was vicious and uncontrollable. Officer Reyes showed up at my door, only to be greeted by a golden retriever who tried to lick his boots clean. He chuckled. "Ma'am, I've seen aggressive dogs. This guy would apologize for wagging too loud." He spent 10 minutes tossing a ball for Cooper in the yard, then turned to me knowingly. "We get a lot of calls from that house," he said, nodding toward Caroline's. "Most of them are bogus." That night, the Pine Valley resistance thread was buzzing. Hank texted that he'd uncovered some history. Caroline left her bank job under a cloud 3 years back. Paula's ex-husband, Evan, a journalist, had been making phone calls and confirmed it. She'd been asked to resign over irregular loan practices. Nothing criminal filed, but the pattern was clear. Caroline had a long history of twisting power to serve herself. Mrs. Wu, our retired accountant neighbor, offered to review the HOA books in detail. "I've seen this before," she told us at a secret garage meeting. "Petty embezzlement, family contracts. It's more common than you'd think." Then came the twist that knocked the wind out of me. My grandfather's estate lawyer called with news. Those dusty old oil leases from the 1960s? Suddenly very valuable again, thanks to new drilling techniques. "Miss Thompson," he said, "your grandfather's mineral rights are worth about $2.3 million in today's market." I sat there, phone in hand, staring at Cooper spinning in circles after his tail, and realized I had enough money to end this nightmare outright. Not just pay Caroline's ridiculous fines, but buy my way out of her little fiefdom entirely. Or better yet, use that leverage to protect everyone. That night, I stayed up reading property law and HOA dissolution procedures. If Caroline wanted to play hardball, I was ready to show her what a real power move looked like. Here's your second knowledge nugget. Always request HOA financial statements yearly. Embezzlement happens more often than you'd think, and boards are legally required to share the books. Most scammers count on homeowners never asking. Cooper sensed the change. His anxiety was gone, replaced by a proud strut that matched my own new determination. We weren't just defending anymore. We were going on the offensive. The foreclosure notice came next, taped to my front door like a scarlet letter. Formal proceedings for $3,000 in stacked fines. 60 days to pay or lose my home. The auction date, March 15th. Caroline was already whispering that the problem neighbor would soon be gone. I won't lie, I cried holding those papers. The rough grain of that legal document scraped against my hands, the salty taste of tears mixing with the harsh truth that maybe Caroline might actually win. For a brief moment, I even considered surrendering Cooper to save the house. The thought of him back in a shelter, bewildered and abandoned again, nearly split me in two. But then he patted over, set his head in my lap, and it was as if he was saying, "We're in this together, remember?" That was when I decided I wasn't going to play the victim anymore. If Caroline saw me as a threat, then I'd become the villain in her story. My first move was to hire a private investigator. Jennifer Morales specialized in HOA fraud cases, and within days she came back with intel that chilled me. Caroline wasn't just corrupt, she was systematic. Your HOA president was forced out of First National Bank for approving loans to relatives without documentation, Jennifer explained. And she's been targeting single women and minorities in Pine Valley since day one. You're just the latest in her pattern. The evidence was devastating. Over 3 years, Caroline had pushed foreclosure on 7 homeowners. 5 were single women. 1 was an elderly Hispanic man who barely spoke English. Another was a young black family with twin toddlers. All of them had been forced to sell under market value to dodge foreclosure shame. And every single sale? Snapped up by Mercer Development Group, her family's company. But then came the twist that turned the whole war on its head. My grandfather's mineral rights weren't just worth millions. They stretched directly under Pine Valley. The original developer had never bothered buying subsurface rights in 2019, back when they were deemed worthless, which meant every single house, including Caroline's, sat on top of oil reserves I legally controlled. My estate lawyer actually chuckled when I asked about options. "Miss Thompson, you could force surface access to those rights through eminent domain, or lease them to the highest bidder. Either way, their foreclosure threat is peanuts compared to your leverage." That weekend, the Pine Valley Resistance staged its biggest gathering yet. 23 households packed into Hank's garage, squeezed between firefighting gear and dusty Christmas boxes. Everyone had a Caroline nightmare to share. "She fined us $800 for letting our son shoot hoops in the driveway after 6 p.m., whispered Maria from down the street. "She tried to cite my mother's wheelchair ramp as a visual disturbance," added David, whose elderly mom lived with him. Every story painted the same ugly picture: Caroline weaponizing HOA rules against the most vulnerable. Mrs. Wu had been combing through the financials with razor-sharp precision. "The money trail is undeniable," she announced. "Caroline's inflating maintenance costs and funneling cash into family contracts. It's outright fraud." Hank nodded grimly. "In the fire department, we'd call this arson, burning a community from the inside." That's when it all clicked for me. This wasn't just about saving my house. It was about shutting down a predator who'd been exploiting my neighbors for years. The foreclosure papers weren't a punishment anymore. They were a challenge. Caroline thought she was cornering me, but she'd actually handed me the perfect excuse to dismantle her entire operation. Evan, Paula's journalist ex, had been digging too. His findings were explosive. The Mercer family had run this exact scam in 3 other subdivisions. Manufactured violations, targeted harassment, forced below-market sales, family redevelopment flips. A criminal enterprise dressed up as neighborhood governance. Here's your third knowledge nugget. Foreclosure for HOA fines comes with very specific procedures. Many boards skip steps, making their actions invalid, or even criminal. Always demand they follow due process to the letter. That night, I sat on my porch with Cooper curled at my feet. listening to the soft hum of traffic in the distance. For the first time in months, I felt calm. Caroline thought she was wrecking my life, but really, she'd given me everything I needed to wreck hers. Caroline was unraveling, and desperation makes people reckless. The smear campaign began on a Monday. Suddenly, neighbors were getting calls about how I planned to bring in drilling rigs that would destroy property values. Caroline was spinning stories that I was some eco-terrorist, intent on turning Pine Valley into an industrial wasteland. She even called an emergency HOA meeting to rush through new bylaws banning industrial activity on residential land. The hypocrisy was almost comical. The woman who'd been running a shady real estate scam was suddenly worried about protecting the community. Her biggest mistake, though, was sending her husband to bribe me. Raymond showed up one Wednesday evening, suit-pressed, cheap cologne failing to mask the sweat of panic. "Lena, we'd like to make you an offer," he said, unfolding a check. $450,000 for your house. That's 70 grand above market, and you won't have to deal with any foreclosure mess. I stared at the check, then at him. "That's generous, Raymond. What's the catch?" He smiled thinly. "No catch. Just a standard NDA for everyone's privacy." An NDA. They were literally trying to pay me to stay quiet about their racket. I told him I'd think about it. In reality, I was already planning to use this attempted payoff as more evidence. While Caroline waged her smear war, I waged my own quiet campaign. I started knocking on doors, offering neighbors $5,000 each for their subsurface rights. Most didn't even realize they owned them. "What's under there, rocks and worms?" laughed Bob 3 houses down. "Sure, take it." By the end of the week, I held mineral rights under 31 of the 47 homes, enough to legally access 2/3 of the neighborhood's underground deposits. Meanwhile, my investigator Jennifer dug even deeper. She found proof the Mercers had repeated this scam in subdivision after subdivision. Harass vulnerable residents, strip them of their homes, funnel the properties into the family's development company. The file of evidence was thick enough to stop a door. Bank statements, emails, property transfers, sworn testimony, it was airtight. Then something incredible happened. Anonymous flyers appeared in mailboxes exposing Caroline's shady financial dealings and family kickbacks. She scrambled door to door trying to snatch them up, but the damage was done. Neighbors were buzzing, board members suddenly demanding answers, her support base crumbling. Caroline panicked harder, creating fake social media accounts to smear me as unstable, even circulating a petition to have Cooper banned from the neighborhood as vicious. Yes, she was trying to blacklist a golden retriever. Meanwhile, I hired a surveying crew to mark mineral right boundaries with bright stakes across Pine Valley. Every hammer strike echoed like a countdown in Caroline's ears. Cooper, now fully confident, became the neighborhood favorite. Kids played with him, neighbors smiled. Even other dogs perked up around him. He was the symbol of change, while Caroline had become the symbol of rot. Then came her nuclear option. She called an emergency HOA meeting for Monday night. The agenda: a vote to expel me under community harmony standards. It was the ultimate strong-arm tactic. I let her think I was panicking, whispering to neighbors that I was scrambling for a lawyer. She even started buying champagne to celebrate my removal. Meanwhile, Evan had a camera crew lined up. The local news was sending a reporter, and social media posts were queued to launch. That very morning, I finalized paperwork buying all the HOA's common areas, parks, playgrounds, and undeveloped land. 15 acres, now mine. Caroline thought she was about to kick me out. She had no clue I just bought the neighborhood out from under her. The community center that Monday was overflowing. Over 60 residents, reporters, cameras, neighbors lining the walls. Caroline strutted in late, dripping jewelry and smugness, heels clicking like a coronation march. She called the meeting to order with her usual condescension. "We're here to address a serious threat to our community standards." She launched into her speech about how I was disrupting harmony, then announced the board's decision to remove me. That's when I stood up with Cooper at my side. "Before we vote, Caroline, let's talk about our HOA finances," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. She snapped, "You're out of order." I pressed on. $47,000 in missing funds. No bid contracts funneled to your brother-in-law. Foreclosure threats designed to funnel homes into your family's company. The room erupted. Neighbors shouted questions, chaos boiling as Caroline banged her gavel in vain. "And what about this email?" I continued, holding up printouts. "Her English is poor enough she won't fight the legal fees." "That's what you wrote about Mrs. Wu?" Gasps filled the room. Cameras captured every second. Caroline went pale, cycling through shades of panic. Then I revealed the ace. "This morning, I purchased every HOA common area with my inheritance from my grandfather's oil rights." The room went dead silent, then exploded in cheers as I held up the deed transfer. "That means I now own the parks, the playgrounds, the open land. And by the way, mineral rights under 31 of your homes." Cooper barked once, perfectly timed, and the place erupted in laughter and applause. One by one, neighbors stood to share their stories: basketball fines, wheelchair ramp harassment, bogus rosebush violations. Mrs. Wu projected the financial records, showing tens of thousands siphoned off. Evan read out the incriminating emails between Caroline and her nephew about targeting residents for removal. Even Raymond tried sneaking out, caught on camera fleeing as reporters followed. Then law enforcement arrived. Detective Harris from Financial Crimes stepped forward with investigators. Bank examiners announced all Mercer accounts were frozen. Caroline's voice cracked as she shrieked, "This is a witch hunt!" But she was out of cards. And then came the mic drop moment. "Actually, Caroline," I said, smiling, "I don't need to drill for oil at all. I'm turning this entire place into a rescue dog sanctuary." Gasps, then wild applause. 15 acres of off-leash paradise, with training programs and therapy dogs for trauma survivors. This neighborhood is about to become what you hate most, a community that cares. Cooper wagged his tail like thunder and the crowd roared. Caroline made one last panic dash, but tripped on her own heels outside. The cameras caught everything as Detective Harris read her rights for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The last image of her reign was being loaded into a cruiser, while Cooper and dozens of rescue dogs barked joyfully in the background. 6 months later, Pine Valley had transformed. The Pine Valley Dog Sanctuary opened to cheers. 47 rescues running free, adoption programs thriving, therapy sessions changing lives. Caroline was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Raymond lost his city planning post. Their house, ironically, sold below market to pay restitution. Her court-ordered community service? Cleaning up after dogs at the very sanctuary she tried to destroy. Watching her in designer pants, scooping retriever poop was poetic justice. But the real victory was what came after. The HOA dissolved, replaced by a resident-run cooperative. Fees went to real improvements. Property values soared. Paula's Garden Gnomes became a tourist stop. Mrs. Wu became treasurer, ensuring absolute transparency. Hank organized safety measures. Evan's expose won awards and spurred legislation on HOA abuse. The Mercer family empire collapsed entirely, exposed for targeting 200 families across 4 neighborhoods. The sanctuary became more than a park. It became a symbol. Kids learned empathy, survivors healed with therapy dogs, local colleges used it for education. Even Cooper found love, with Hank's beagle, Rosie. And me? I found something special too, right here among neighbors who'd once been afraid to breathe. Now the sound of children's laughter and dogs running free fills the air where Caroline's stilettos once clicked. Pine Valley is finally what a neighborhood should be. Not a place ruled by fear, but a community where people and pets alike can belong. If you've got your own HOA nightmare brewing, drop it in the comments. I'll read them all and share the best advice I learned. Bullies count on silence. Don't give them that satisfaction.